Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is sustain, and I want to say thank you to the viewer Robert for suggesting this particular verb. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use the verb sustain. The first way you might hear it used is to mean to strengthen or provide physical or mental support to someone or some group. I feel like I've heard sustain used as people have described their experiences during the pandemic. For some people, this was extremely challenging because they were alone, they were isolated, they were unable to be with their loved ones. But there might have been certain other activities or maybe certain technology that allowed other physical support. So it sustained them, it strengthened them during this very difficult time. A second way you might hear the verb sustain used is to mean to bear the weight of something without breaking. So when I think of this particular definition, I think about the modals can and could as we sort of talk about perhaps an object's ability to sustain or hold the weight of some other object. A third way you might hear sustain used is to mean to suffer something unpleasant. With this particular definition, unfortunately, I think of injuries. And as I've read news reports on a variety of subjects, might be from car accidents to sporting competitions, you will frequently see the verb sustain used when someone has had an injury or perhaps multiple injuries. So they will say, this person sustained, and then kind of describe. Maybe it's a broken arm or cuts or something else. A fourth way you hear sustain used is to mean to cause something to continue for an extended period of time. So with this particular definition, my mind goes to business. And especially as it sort of comes to budgeting and forecasting for the future, people wondering, do we have enough cash to sustain the business, keep the business operating for some period of time? A fifth way you might hear sustain used is to mean to uphold or confirm the validity of something. As I looked for examples of this particular meaning, I was taken to various sentences and articles connected to investigations and the law. So you might encounter the verb in those kinds of situations. So someone confirming the truth or the validity of something else. You should know that sustain is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, you're just going to add ing to form sustaining. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, sustain, ends in a voiced in sound. So our past tense ending here is just going to make a D sound, and we're not adding an extra syllable as we say it. It should sound like this: sustained, sustained. Okay. Now, there is a phrasal verb that has a couple different meanings that we're going to look at a little more closely. That is to sustain in. And this particular phrasal verb always gets separated. So we're going to have an object come between the verb sustain and the preposition in. And the first way you might hear sustain in used is to mean to help one maintain good spirits, or maybe to help someone work through a difficult time, a difficult situation. So this definition very much ties back to the first main definition of the verb we looked at earlier. Here's an example that uses this particular meaning. My spouse has sustained me in the worst of times. So a person saying something like this is commenting that his or her spouse helps them stay in good spirits or helps them during some difficult challenges or difficult periods. A second way we can use sustain in is to mean to provide something necessary. And many times, as this particular definition is being used, people are referring to food or they're referring to money. So those are some of the most common of providing something necessary. An example of this might be their loyal customers sustained the business in the months following the tornado. So here, I'm assuming, right, the customers were spending money. They provided this source of income so that the business could continue. Now let's practice using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the past perfect and the present perfect. We'll start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense to note that a particular action occurred before a certain point in the past or before another past action. That second action is usually in the simple past tense. Okay, so to make the past perfect, we need two parts. So there are, again, two P's to the name of this verb tense. Okay, to do this, we're going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then we use the participle form of the verb. Here's an example. Officers arrived and noticed the suspect had sustained non-life threatening injury. So here, in this particular sentence, notice the had sustained, that's in the past perfect, so that's what occurred first. What occurred after was the arrival and the noticing. Those actions were later. Okay, so one reason, again, people use the past perfect. If we want to make a negative past perfect sentence, my structure will be subject, then had, then not, and then the participle. You might also hear the contraction, hadn't, and then the participle. Here's another example. He hadn't sustained a conversation for very long when he was interrupted by the fire alarm. So here, with this particular sentence, we're talking about that idea of something continuing for an extended period of time. And because we have a negative sentence here, we're saying the conversation didn't continue. Now let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, we start with had, then we have our subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's an example. Had campus buildings sustained damage in the storm? Right? So again, we're thinking about something happening, something occurring, that's something negative. This would be a bit similar to like sustain an injury, so sustain damage. Now let's take a look at the present perfect. We use this verb tense to describe an action that started in the past and continues into the present, or we use it to describe something that occurred in the past but at an unknown time. To make present perfect sentences, we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use have and then the participle. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use has and then the participle. Here's an example sentence. My friends have sustained me through many challenges. Right? So again, this idea of providing emotional support. If I want to make a negative present perfect sentence, my structure will be to have my subject, then haven't or hasn't, or we could say have not in the participle or has not in the participle. Either way works. An example of this. The team hasn't sustained its winning ways in recent years. So with this particular sentence, we're back to the definition of something continuing for an extended period of time. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, we start with have or has, whichever form matches our subject, and then the subject comes next. And then we use the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Has the investigation sustained the ethical violations? This sentence is going to go back to our fifth definition of the verb. So demonstrating the truth or the validity of something here. So perhaps someone accused a person of breaking an ethical rule. And now we want to know, did this investigation, did it prove it true? Did it sustain it? Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words related to our verb sustain. And the first word we're going to look at is the adjective sustainable. This can have a couple different meanings. We're going to discuss two. The first would be to be describing something that is able to be maintained at a certain rate or a particular level. An example of this might be, is working a 70-hour week sustainable? So if I was asking this question to a friend or a coworker, right, I'm wanting to know, can they continue to work 70 hours each week as time moves on? Okay, can you maintain that quantity of working hours? A second way you'll hear the adjective sustainable used is in connection to the environment. So with the second one, we're describing something that conserves or saves resources, or maybe even consumes fewer natural resources. An example of this might be, we're making changes at home to live in a more sustainable way. So to live in a way where we're buying fewer things, maybe we're consuming less plastic, right? All in the hopes of helping the environment, helping our natural resources continue on into the future. Another related word you might hear is the adverb sustainably. Just like our adjective had a couple different definitions, this adverb does as well. So the first way is we're describing an action, or we're describing another adjective, and we're describing something that's done in a way that can be maintained at a particular level or at a particular rate. An example of this, the entrepreneur is building her business sustainably to encourage resilience. So here, maybe this business owner is not trying to grow just as fast, right? But is being conscious or aware to grow in a way that it can be maintained. So it's not like growth and then kind of decline or contraction, right? And kind of this up and down, but kind of a steady upward movement. The second way we use the adverb sustainably is again connected to the environment. So we're describing something that's being done in a way to avoid the depletion of natural resources. Again, sort of keeping in mind what's going to be good for the environment going forward. An example of this might be, we're going to do our laundry more sustainably. Now, I'm aware that some people will take one towel, put it in their washing machine, and do a load of laundry in that particular way. But that consumes a lot of water to wash one article, right? So being aware, maybe using cold water versus hot, those are some things that can help with reducing the resources we're consuming as we do this particular chore. The last word we're going to look at is the noun sustainability. You are probably noticing a pattern here. So two ways we can use this noun. One would be to refer to the ability of something to be maintained at a particular rate or at a particular level. An example of this, the company is examining the sustainability of its growth and expansion. So again, the idea for this particular organization is not just grow as fast as we can, but are we adding locations? Are we expanding in a way that we can kind of maintain that growth? The second way we can use the noun sustainability is, of course, connected to the environment. So we're talking about actions that avoid the depletion or the reduction of natural resources. And again, All of these actions are for the benefit of the environment. An example of how you might hear this used, many companies will say, our company is devoted to environmental sustainability. So they are, hopefully, their actions match their words. I should note that. Many people say this, but then their actions don't always agree or line up. But if someone is following through in this particular sentence, they're thinking about how do we use less? How do we consume less? And how do we do things to reduce global warming and our contribution to global warming? Thanks again to Robert for making this wonderful suggestion. I appreciate everyone who has watched, and I hope you all have a great day.